Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to be talking about digital signage and how you can control it from some very common technology, specifically OBS and NDI. And as you can see by looking over here, we'll be doing some live demonstrations about different ways to set it up and also different ways to work through scenes effectively that you may want to show on set signage. But before we get to that, I want to remind everybody that we will be taking video calling again. So if you'd like to join us here on the show, ask any questions, and most specifically, share experiences, things that you've run into or challenges you've had trying to do some of the things we're talking about. That would be great to have you on air and joining us. So let's get started. I'm going to start by looking first at how you can set up odd aspect ratio canvases. Brad, hello. Good to see you here. Uh, so if you look here, what I have are two 1920 by 1080 monitors that are set up, but they're set up now in a sort of a portrait position. And so the effective resolution of this display setup that we have here is 1080 across, which would be the normal depth of a monitor, but then 1920 by 2, which would be 3840. So when we're looking at this, we have a 1080 by 3840 monitor. So if we switch over and look at OBS, which is what we're going to be using to sort of set this up for this case, what I need to do here is I need to create uh, a profile, basically in settings, that describe this uh, aspect ratio. And that's one of the cool things about OBS. It actually lets you do these types of odd aspect ratio configurations. So if I said here, it's going to be 1080 by 3840. So with that, and I apply that, you'll now see that the canvas that I've set up here actually lines up with the display we have over here. And that I think is going to be really important because you can use this now to set up sort of any configuration that's rectilinear. So as long as it's X across by X down, you could do any type of monitor configuration using this. So what we want to do now that we actually have the canvas set up correctly for this is we want to set up in OBS what's called a scene. And the scene will be all the elements that you want to display in one specific uh, instance. So basically you can switch between scenes in OBS to change what's being displayed. So we'll just create a new scene here and we'll call this vertical monitor. Okay, so if I go into the scene, what I have now are the ability to add sources to this. So this is where we start to put everything together. We have the canvas set up to line up to the monitors. We have the scene as really the holder, the envelope, which will contain all the elements we want to paint on the canvas. And now we start adding those elements. So if you look here, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to put a background like we have here on this display here. So I'll pick a media source and we'll call it a new one. So we'll call it background. And when I click OK, I can go in now and pick whatever I want to use for that background. So let's see here. I have this is just a blue abstract. But now you see that the asset that I actually picked here is a traditional 1920 by 1080 16:9 aspect ratio. So what I want to do first when I'm dealing with this type of odd aspect ratio is I can go in and I can just rotate it. Nope. I I know what happened. I should put it on loop so it continues to play. So now I go back here and I want to go into properties here and okay, just give me a second. I want to go transform. And what I want to do is I want to rotate this asset now 90 degrees clockwise. So now I've started to position it. So this is really what's going to be on the top half. But because I want to have something that has a continuous flow to it, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stretch this out and slide this down across both monitor displays. So this now gives me something that has interesting movement in it. Uh, it covers the entire two panels of the display over here, which I'll get to when we look at this one specifically that we set up. And it gives me something now to start building on. So the next thing I'll do is I'll just put another asset in front of it. So we'll do an image, and I had an image here. We'll just call it the globe. I think that's, and this would just be a little PNG file. Set that up. And now if you see here, the globe is on top of the image we have as a background. And I can just spread this out and place this anywhere I'd want. So now this is basically how we assemble uh, an asset that we want to display on a set of monitors. So this hopefully gives you a general sense of how you can just use the traditional layering in OBS to create what is basically a scene that we'll display on our monitors. So the next thing now is, how do we actually set up these monitors to work the way we want it to work here? Because that's not a traditional sort of Windows configuration that you'd see if you were working with these on a normal desktop computer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop out of OBS here, and I'm actually just going to go into the traditional Windows display. So if you look here, when I have this set up, you have the ability to go in. What I did is I went into set display properties. And when I go into display properties, you see the two monitors. So the smaller one that you see is the monitor that I have in front of me on the desk. And the larger one is the monitor that I have up here. So they're different size monitors. But I'm just going to show what would be done here, and then we'll go over it in detail as I go into what we did specifically here. So the first thing you're going to want to be able to do is, once you identify your monitors, you're going to want to be able to say, what's the orientation of these monitors? And that's something that we don't typically use, but I have the ability to set monitors up in all different orientations. So I have landscape and portrait, which would be just the two traditional wide aspect and then the tall aspect, but you also then can flip them. So if you turn the monitor one way and you want the image bottom and top to be correct, you have the ability to set those as flipped as well. So what we've done in this case is we've taken both of these monitors and actually set them up as portrait flipped, because that's the way we could have the larger bezel on the outside. And we then told Windows that the orientation we wanted for these monitors would be where one is stacked on top of the other. So that gave us the ability now to not only describe the layout, but describe the relative position of all the monitors that are connected to the system. So that's the way I effectively built one large screen here from these two displays, and are working and are driving it with one full video image coming out of OBS. So let's dive in a little bit over here to what we need to do with Studio Monitor. So let's see if I have the mouse for over here. So I'm going to just try to do this. Probably not the easiest thing for everybody to see. But one of the things, if you look over here, well, you won't be able to see it. There are settings over here that you can have, which say how you want to look at Studio Monitor regarding multi-monitor setups. And so the way we have this set up here is we have it set up so that it says, I want to display Studio Monitor across all the monitors that I have. So in this case, when I display this image on using Studio Monitor, which is how I'm feeding it through NDI, I now paint it in this odd aspect ratio across both monitors simultaneously. So that's another great thing. NDI, and I've mentioned this before when we've talked about it, NDI is resolution independent. It doesn't care what size you give to the video you feed it. So this means that even these odd, weird shaped layouts you can do in any type of on-set signage that you want. So that gives you the ability now in doing this to create very wide walls. You can create walls that are not 16 by 9 anymore. You just stick multiple monitors side by side. And because you can do the layout in Windows for how you want the monitors and use Studio Monitor to span those monitors the way you lay them out, you now have a lot of flexibility with ways you can paint on displays. And that's incredibly powerful because what we're using here is off-the-shelf tools. OBS is free, NDI Studio Monitor is free. So this is something that you can set up basically if you have monitors with virtually no expense. Whatever computer you need to drive them is really it. Okay, so let me sort of pull this out of the way here. And uh, so let's talk a bit about how we actually set this up directly. So I have, let's see, we'll start over here. So if we look at what I have set up here, I've actually created something that's probably a little more complex than we had before, but I have effectively multiple layers here. And what I want to do with this monitor, I have my top layer, which we actually call Story 0. And I'll explain this now in more detail. So if I look at each one of these are scenes that I have set up. And what I want to do is I want to show that I could have multiple images that I flip between on these displays on my set. So if I were a news organization, I was covering multiple stories, I would be able to just flip from story to story and have correct imagery show up on set. So Story 0 is this scene that we have right here. So what I have is on the top, I have this symbol, which is basically a Streaming Alchemy logo. That's a PNG file that we layered on top of a moving background that we positioned here in the scene, identically to what we did previously when I laid it out from scratch. So what we have here now, though, is the ability to switch between these stories. So I have another story here, which is about firefighters, and I have another one here, which is about STEM research in schools. So these stories now, I can switch between them. And the way I set this up so I could do this easily if I were in a live situation is I created a wrapper of a scene that contains the 3 scenes that have the videos that I want to use. So now, if I want to switch between these scenes, it's very easy to just peel one scene off the top and then another scene off the top and switch between them. And the reason we want to do something that way is that it makes it very easy to switch between them if I want to do things, let me show you here, across multiple monitors. So now, one of the things that we do now is I have a second set of scenes that are lined up over here, displaying on this monitor. And what I've done is something very, very similar. So if you switch back here to OBS, what I have here is one master scene for, let's see if I can make this a little bigger. I have one master scene here, which would be all the things I want to display on the larger monitor. And then I have individual stories that are set up for each of them. And in this case, these are just images that I have set up. We have single or videos, as the case may be. And I have those set up as a set of stories that I'd be covering here. So I use scenes and I use the sources inside the scenes to create display content that I want to then drive through key presses. So what I'm doing next, and hopefully this is clear. What I'm going to be doing next is I'm going to be setting up hotkeys that I can use to switch between these scenes. So let me go over here. Mouse. So inside settings, you'll see that there's a section called hotkeys. And what I've done is I've taken the stories for the side panel, which is what you see sitting here. And I created a set of control keys that I can use to show or hide that as it comes up on the screen. So this now gives me the ability to easily switch between the stories the imagery that I want to show for different stories over on the side panel. But in addition to that, I actually did the same thing over here in let me get this set. So in the settings, I lined up and did the same thing with the hotkeys. So now, because I've done it this way, I have the ability using hotkeys to change both monitors simultaneously. So if you look here and look at these two monitors, if we could do a wide shot, if I go, I can now go between, well, I guess something happened, but we'll just roll with it. But this gives you the ability to. I'll actually show you how I fix it. So we just really somehow the video for this story got lost. So if I just go in here and select it and tell it to loop, let's see if it works. Nope. Well, I just had OBS crash. so so clearly, not everything works the way we want it to. But so what I have here, though, if we're looking at this here, is I have the ability to toggle between the different scenes that I have set up, where I go between STEM, uh, and I go between the firefighters and then back to the control. And what I had wanted to show is that I wanted to show that you could actually change the scenes that are running on both displays. So this gives you the ability with single key presses now to control multiple monitors that you would have inside your set and drive them uh, concurrently. So one key press, everything changes. And some of the places where this could actually be very useful would be in worship services, where if you're going and working with, song lyrics that you may want to display on one screen and you want to display imagery on others, it can work in news organizations where you want to be able to constantly change the imagery that you're using based on what you're talking about at a specific time. And the other thing is because we're talking about NDI here and we're just doing uh, assets streamed over NDI, you have also the ability now to use this in virtual sets. So if you wanted to create monitor layouts that are odd aspect ratios, you can do that with NDI in virtual sets as well. So this means that you can set up a whole framework, whether virtually or in a physical set, or on a stage like a church where you may have, more visual assets that you want to have going on. Uh, and you can do that now all using off the shelf tools like OBS and NDI. So I know this didn't turn out exactly the way I wanted to show it all, but hopefully this gives you an idea of the types of things you can do with signage. I think there's something really compelling about having imagery as a part of your presentation, whatever that is. So it can be anything that from branding that you want to use to promote your own show or a sponsored event where you want to promote a sponsor. But it can also be things that actually feed into the content you're producing directly. So, uh, what I will do is after we end the show, we'll come back up and I'll bring this back on and I'll do the demo just so anybody that wants to stick around and look at that, is very welcome to do that. So, uh, before we switch off, I just want to remind everybody that I will be talking at a conference coming up from Stream Geeks, the Stream Geeks Summit, that will be held in New York. I know that there's been ticket sales going on, and there are probably some tickets that are still available for that. But that will be November 8th. So that will be what I'm going to do since November 8th is a Friday. Is we will do sort of a from the summit show that Friday at 2 p.m. So, give everybody a quick update of everything that's going on. But I'm going to be talking about live streaming 101. Basically, how would you get started? Some of the things you need to be asking yourself to set up your show, to schedule it, to understand your angle and perspective on whatever the topic is you want to cover. So I think it's going to be a pretty interesting show, and hopefully, I'll get to see some of you there. So for next week, uh, what I actually want to do is I want to do a deep dive into NDI 4.0. So we've talked about it a lot. We use it on almost everything we do. But I want to share with you a few of the tools that are available now with the NDI 4.0 release and go through some of the things that we find are really useful ways to leverage these tools in productions that we do like day to day. So, Bill, sorry, welcome. Glad to have you here. Bill Corkery just joined us, so thank you. Uh, and so, if you'll notice, I also said it's VizRT groups. So, one of the other things that came out of the past IBC is that NewTek and VizRT, which acquired NewTek, about 6 months ago, they are now spinning off NDI as a separate entity, a separate business line, and they're putting NewTek, VizRT, and NDI now under an umbrella company called the VizRT Group. So when we refer to NDI, we'll all think NewTek because that's sort of where we came from, but officially now it's part of VizRT's group. So uh, I'll say goodbye for right now, but as soon as we sort of close the show, we'll come back and do an after show where I'll go through and show in a little more detail what didn't work during the live show. So thanks everybody for joining. Have a great week if I don't see you. Okay. So hello everyone. So what I'm trying to do now is get everything set up the way we had it before. And I'm basically going back and doing the same things that we did initially. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get the video set up correctly for this monitor here. So we'll just say we're 1920 by 1080. And we'll apply that. So now we actually have the video here that I was looking for. So let me go back and I'll just do a quick run through of what we missed during the actual show, so everybody has a copy of this. So the only difference now between what I showed during the show and what I'm going to show now is that we have two instances of OBS running, and the reason for this is that we actually have two layouts, what they call profiles in OBS for how the video is painting. So in this display, we're doing the 1080 by 3840. And on this display here, we're doing 1920 by 1080. So we actually have effectively two discrete canvases that we need to work with. So you can only work with one canvas size per instance of OBS. So I basically just launched two instances of OBS. And as I was pointing out before, if we go into the settings and the hotkeys, we have the same hotkeys driving this main display that we have driving the two side displays. So all I need to do now, if cancel, don't want to change anything here. Okay. So all I need to do now, if I want to drive them both, is I can go and hit the control keys. And so this will drop these front images. And now this would be the firefighter news story that you could have. where you could have video playing or another image on a large monitor. And then you could have uh, these two side monitors with sort of interest images that sort of help tell the story. Uh, the other thing, though, is that you could have these monitors physically in your set, and you could be driving this virtually. You could be an over the shoulder shot that you have. So, a lot of flexibility when you start to think of signage. It moves beyond necessarily having these physical uh, panels, and it can be a mix now or all virtual. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. And I have the same thing now. I could take this off and jump to the next story. And the great thing now is I'm changing all these displays, and they all are in sync with each other. But it's very easy now to just pop between them and sort of come back. And now I'm back to my standard show branding display. So uh, if you guys do have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. Uh, I am sorry we had the failure during the show itself, but hopefully this covers everything that we wanted to talk about and gives you an idea of the types of things you can do with OBS, NDI, and digital signage. So take care. Thanks for hanging out with us.